The police officer seen knocking down Ian Tomlinson during the G20 protests will not be prosecuted over his death. Mr. Tomlinson was pushed over on his way home and later died. His family says the decision not to prosecute anyone is a disgrace.
Why has there been no charge? We have to go home now to know Dad.
2 British soldiers are shot dead in Afghanistan trying to save an injured colleague. A last-minute ban. The BNP leader Nick Griffin will be refused entry this afternoon to a Buckingham Palace garden party after using his invitation for party political purposes. A BBC undercover investigation raises questions about the way animals are handled at a big veterinary practice. In line for a handsome sum, the treasure hunter who found the biggest haul of Roman coins in a Somerset field. And what a way to bow out. Sri Lanka's Muralitharan claims his 800th wicket with the final ball of his Test career.
And in sport, Martin Jol snubs the manager's job at Fulham. The Dutchman confirmed he'll stay with Ajax, bringing to an end days of wrangling between the clubs.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1 o'clock. A police officer who was filmed pushing a man to the ground during the G20 protests in London last year will not face charges over his death. Ian Tomlinson was walking home near the demonstration when he was hit with a baton by a police officer and then pushed over. After a thorough review, the Crown Prosecution Service says a successful prosecution was unlikely. Our Home Affairs correspondent, June Kelly, is in central London now. June.
Well, Sophie, I'm at the headquarters of the Crown Prosecution Service. The Tomlinson family were here this morning and there was absolute fury from them. They say they do not understand why, after a lengthy criminal investigation, there will be no charges.
It has been a painfully long wait. For 15 months, the family of Ian Tomlinson have been living with their loss. Today, finally, came the announcement on charges.
The CPS are clearly admitting that the police officer assaulted their dad. Why has there been no charge? We have to go home now to know Dad.
It seems to be so much harder when you go up against a police officer, you know. If this would have been anyone else, I think this would have been dealt with a long time ago. When you're going up against the old Bill, you're fighting too much of a losing battle. Everyone favoured him from the outset.
The family's lawyer spoke of a lack of will and incompetence by the authorities.
Clearly, it's a disgraceful decision. The CPS have accepted that the conduct of the officer was unlawful.
Ian Tomlinson was on his way home when he was caught up in the G20 protests, his final journey captured on camera. The officer pushing him can be named today as PC Simon Harwood, a member of the Met Police's territorial support group. A manslaughter charge was ruled out because of different opinions from the medical experts as to the cause of death. 2 pathologists said it was due to internal bleeding. But the pathologist who carried out the original post-mortem, Dr. Freddie Patel, said Mr. Tomlinson had died of a heart attack.
Even after this extensive exercise, there remains an irreconcilable conflict between Dr. Patel on the one hand and the other experts on the other as to the cause of death. A conflict between medical experts inevitably makes a prosecution very difficult.
Ian Tomlinson's family say they are now going to take time to consider their next move. An inquest will now have to be held into his death.
Well, the Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer, said this morning that they'd also looked at bringing possibly a charge of common assault against this officer. But what he did say was that there's a 6-month time limit on bringing that charge, and they were basically out of time on pursuing that particular option.
So, June, what, if anything, happens now?
Well, now it all goes back to the Met Police, and they will have to decide whether this officer should face any disciplinary charges internally. Sophie.
June, thank you very much. Tributes have been paid to 2 British servicemen who were killed as they tried to save a colleague in Afghanistan. The men from the Royal Dragoon Guards and 1st Battalion Scots Guards have been described as selfless and courageous. It's understood they were shot by Taliban insurgents. Let's talk now to our correspondent Ian Tomlinson, who's in Kabul. Is there a feeling that the tactics are changing there?
Well, I think there's certainly an indication that there is an increasing use of shootings. The situation in this particular case was that the men were part of a security cordon and they came under fire from the Taliban. If you look at the best statistics, it shows that there has been a small increase in the number of shootings, and anecdotally we're hearing from other parts, not just of Helmand province, but other parts of the south and the east, that the Taliban are resorting increasingly to those tactics. But it's fair to say that the vast majority of deaths and injuries come as a result of IEDs, the improvised explosive devices which are buried into the road, and account for the majority of deaths, as I say, and the majority of injuries. They normally strike foot patrols or patrols that are driving by. But this increased use of shootings would suggest confidence on behalf of the Taliban, because ISAF have long argued that the resort to the use of roadside bombs is an indication of desperation on behalf of the Taliban, that they're afraid to come and fight face to face with the troops. This suggests that this is a crucial summer, not just for ISAF, but also for the Taliban.
Given the mounting death toll, though, the idea of getting British troops out of Afghanistan in the next 5 years or so, is that looking unrealistic?
Well, I think you have to weigh the two things against each other. We've had the last 48 hours with lots of discussion in Washington and here in Kabul about an exit strategy for the troops, for British troops and for American troops and the other foreigners who are based here. They're talking about a plan to hand over to Afghan forces, and that has been the centre of gravity in terms of the debate. But at the same time, the fighting has been going on in the south. We've seen a number of British casualties over the last few days, and these latest two underlines the very real challenges that are being faced on the ground. If you look at the bare statistics, there was doubling in terms of the number of British deaths in the first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year. Any other measurement you choose to look at also shows an increase in violence. What ISAF and what the British government would say is, even though the violence is increasing, security is growing for the people on the ground. But I think the truth is that unless they can get that under grips, unless they can weaken the Taliban, reduce the instances of violence, reduce the number of British casualties, then the kind of progress needed to hand over to Afghan forces won't be in place, and any talk of withdrawal may start to look premature.
Ian Pannell, thank you very much. Well, the bodies of 4 more soldiers killed over the weekend in Afghanistan have been flown home this morning. Marine Jonathan Crooks of 40 Commando, Royal Marines, Sergeant David Monkhouse from the Royal Dragoon Guards, Staff Sergeant Brett Linley from 11 EOD Regiment Royal Logistic Corps, and Senior Aircraftman Nick Griffin, 1st Squadron RAF Regiment, were flown back to RAF Lynham this morning. Later this afternoon, a funeral cortege will pass through the nearby town of Wootton Bassett. 2 men have appeared before Newcastle Crown Court charged with conspiracy to murder in connection with the shootings carried out by Raoul Moat in the northeast of England. Carl Ness and Quorum Awan, who appeared via video link from prison, are accused of helping the former doorman target police officers. More than 1 million Equitable Life members will receive far less compensation than they had hoped following the near collapse of the pensions company. The government has announced that policyholders will get, on average, a few £100s. Campaign groups had called for much more. The BNP leader, Nick Griffin, will be refused entry this afternoon to a Buckingham Palace garden party after using his invitation for party political purposes. Well, let's get more from our political correspondent, Ben Wright. Ben, this has been announced, really, in the last sort of 10 minutes. What has happened?
That's right. In the last 10 minutes, and only 2 hours